Justice was far from blind in Judge Arthur Pendleton's courtroom. It only seemed to respect the cost of a defendant's suit. So when a quiet black woman in a moth-eaten grey cardigan stood before him, Pendleton saw nothing more than an easy target for his cruel jokes. He mocked her silence, ridiculed her appearance, and threatened her with jail, basking in the snickering of the gallery. But that laughter died instantly when she reached into her bag, not for a wallet, but for a golden badge that outranked everyone in the building. She wasn't a victim. She was Chief Justice Beatrice Washington, and she hadn't come to be judged. She had come to pass sentence on him. The air conditioning in Courtroom 4B of the hidden municipal building in Ridley County had been broken since 1998, or at least that was the running joke among the regulars. The air was thick, smelling of stale coffee, floor wax, and the nervous sweat of people who knew they were about to lose money they didn't have. It was 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, usually the time reserved for traffic violations, petty disputes, and the churning of the bureaucratic machine. Officer Greg Miller, a bailiff whose uniform strained against a midsection built on years of cafeteria donuts, leaned against the doorframe. He chewed on a toothpick, his eyes scanning the pews with a look of bored contempt. To Miller, everyone on the other side of the wooden railing was guilty of something. If not the crime they were charged with, then the crime of wasting his time. In the back row, clutching a worn leather handbag that had seen better decades, sat Beatrice. She was a small woman, her hair pulled back into a severe, tight bun that highlighted the grey strands mapping her 70 years of life. She wore a cardigan that was arguably 2 sizes too big, a nondescript shade of charcoal grey that seemed to absorb the dim light of the room rather than reflect it. She sat with her knees pressed together, her posture perfect, her eyes fixed on the empty judge's bench. "All rise," Miller barked, not bothering to take the toothpick out of his mouth. The shuffling of feet was immediate. The court regulars knew better than to be slow when the Honorable Judge Arthur Pendleton entered the room. Judge Pendleton swept in, his black robes billowing like the wings of a predatory bird. He was a handsome man, in a conventional, polished way, jawline sharp, silver hair perfectly coiffed, and a tan that spoke of weekends on a boat, not working in a humid courthouse. He was 55, ambitious, and currently stalled in his career. He blamed the system. He blamed diversity hires. He blamed everyone but himself for the fact that he was presiding over Ridley County instead of sitting on the federal circuit. He sat down, adjusting his glasses, and looked at the docket with a sneer. He hated Tuesdays. Tuesdays were for the poor. "First case," Pendleton muttered, waving a hand dismissively at the clerk, a young woman named Sarah who looked terrified of him. "Case number 492B, Sarah squeaked into her microphone. "City of Ridley versus Beatrice Washington. Unpaid municipal fines and failure to appear." Beatrice stood up. She moved slowly, not with the frailty of age, but with a deliberate, measured pace. She walked to the defendant's podium and placed her old bag on the table. Pendleton didn't even look up. He was scribbling something on a notepad, likely his lunch order. "Name?" "Beatrice Washington, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was low, raspy, but clear. It carried a timbre that vibrated against the wood paneling, a sound of old iron. Pendleton finally looked up. He peered over the rim of his spectacles, his blue eyes icy and assessing. He took in the grey cardigan, the lack of jewellery, the sensible orthopedic shoes. He saw a nobody. He saw a statistic. "Ms. Washington," Pendleton sighed, leaning back in his leather chair, the springs groaning. "You are charged with 3 counts of unpaid parking citations dating back to 2021 and a failure to appear in court last month. Do you have a lawyer, or are you wasting my time representing yourself?" "I will represent myself, Judge," Beatrice replied. A ripple of amusement went through the courtroom. The prosecutor's table, occupied by an eager young shark named David Sterling, no relation to the good Sterlings of the county, Pendleton mused, smirked. Pro se defendants were usually entertainment. "Of course you are," Pendleton chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He looked at the gallery, playing to his audience. "They always represent themselves. Tell me, Miss Washington, did you get your law degree from the University of Google? Or perhaps you watched an episode of Law and Order last night and feel prepared to argue jurisprudence?" Officer Miller snorted from the corner. Beatrice didn't flinch. She didn't look down. She looked Arthur Pendleton dead in the eye. "I am familiar with the law, yes." "Familiar?" Pendleton mocked, picking up a gavel and twirling it. "Well, familiarity isn't currency here. Money is, and it seems you owe the city $400. How do you plead?" "I plead interested," Beatrice said. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. Even the court stenographer paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. Pendleton's smile vanished. His face went rigid. "Excuse me." "I said I am interested," Beatrice continued, her voice remaining calm, devoid of the shaking fear Pendleton feasted on. "Interested in why I received a citation for a vehicle I do not own, on a street that does not exist, signed by an officer who has been deceased for 3 years. Pendleton blinked. He looked at the file. He hadn't actually read it. He never read the Tuesday files. He just stamped guilty and moved on. But now, his ego was bruised. A woman looking like her, a woman who looked like she should be cleaning his office, not arguing in his court, was challenging him. "What's your tone, Ms. Washington?" Pendleton hissed, leaning forward. "You are in a court of law, not a street market. You don't get to haggle or make up stories. The record shows the citations are valid." "The record is incorrect," Beatrice stated simply. "The record is never incorrect," Pendleton shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "The audacity. You come in here, dressed like you just rolled out of a donation bin, and tell me how my court records work?" He looked around the room, inviting the mockery. "Look at her. Probably thinks affidavit is a type of sandwich." Laughter. Cruel, sharp laughter erupted from the gallery. Officer Miller laughed the loudest, slapping his thigh. Even the young prosecutor, David, chuckled, shaking his head. Beatrice stood amidst the wave of ridicule. She stood like a statue in a storm, unmoving, unbothered. She waited for the laughter to die down. "Are you finished, Judge?" she asked. Pendleton's face turned a shade of crimson. "I am finished when I say I am finished, and I'm about to finish you." The atmosphere in courtroom 4B shifted from bored amusement to tense hostility. Judge Pendleton wasn't just annoyed anymore, he was offended. In his worldview, hierarchy was everything. He was at the top, the king of this little fiefdom. People like Beatrice Washington were at the bottom, meant to be silent, pay their fines, and disappear. Her refusal to submit was an affront to the natural order. "Let's proceed," Pendleton said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet growl. "Since you want to play lawyer, let's look at the evidence. Mr. Sterling?" David Sterling stood up, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. The state has records of a 2014 Honda Civic registered to a Beatrice Washington parked illegally on Elm Street 3 times in November." "I have never owned a Honda Civic," Beatrice said, "and I have never lived on Elm Street. I reside on 4th Avenue in the Capital District." "The Capital District?" Pendleton laughed out loud. "You? Living in the Capital District? Please. That creates a credibility issue right there. That neighborhood is for professionals, Civil servants, not—" He waved a hand at her vague direction. "Not what, Judge?" Beatrice asked. "Say it." "Not people who look like they're stealing napkins from the cafeteria," Pendleton spat out. "Enough of this charade. You're lying to the court. You're wasting resources. I'm amending the charges. Contempt of court." Sarah, the clerk, gasped audibly. "Judge?" she whispered. "Contempt? For a parking ticket hearing?" "She is mocking the dignity of this bench," Pendleton roared. He turned his glare back to Beatrice. "I'm setting bail at $5,000. You'll sit in county lockup until you learn some respect. Maybe a few nights on a cot will remind you of your place." Beatrice didn't panic. She didn't beg. Most defendants, when threatened with jail, would crumble. They would cry, apologize, offer to pay double. Beatrice just reached into her bag. "Officer Miller!" Pendleton shouted. "She's reaching for something. Secure her." Miller, eager for some action, unholstered his taser and lunged forward. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" The courtroom erupted in chaos. People screamed. The stenographer ducked under her desk. Beatrice moved with surprising speed. She didn't pull out a gun. She didn't pull out a knife. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder and a small, heavy wooden box. She slammed the box onto the defendant's table with a crack that rivaled a gunshot. "Sit down, Officer Miller," she commanded. Her voice had changed. It wasn't the raspy voice of an old woman anymore. It was the booming, authoritative projection of someone used to commanding rooms far larger and far more important than this one. Miller froze. He didn't know why, but his legs stopped working. There was a command in her tone that bypassed his brain and went straight to his instincts. He lowered the taser. "I said sit down," she repeated. "You don't give orders here." Pendleton screamed, standing up. "I am the judge. I am the law in this room." "You are a disgrace to this room," Beatrice said calmly. She opened the leather folder. Arthur James Pendleton, appointed to the municipal bench in 2015. 3 formal complaints of racial bias filed in 2018, all dismissed by a review board, chaired by your college roommate, Gregory Hines. Financial discrepancies in your campaign fund, noted in 2020. And today, blatant violation of Judicial Canon 3, Section B, requiring a judge to be patient, dignified, and courteous to litigants. Pendleton's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Who are you? How do you have those files? Those are sealed internal documents." "They are sealed to the public," Beatrice said, opening the small wooden box she had placed on the table. Inside lay a gavel, but it wasn't the standard pine gavel of a municipal court. It was mahogany, with a gold band wrapped around the head. The seal of the Supreme Court of the state was etched into the gold. She lifted her eyes to meet his. "They are not sealed to the chair of the Judicial Oversight Commission." Beatrice reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a badge wallet. She flipped it open. The gold shield caught the fluorescent lights, blinding in its brilliance. Below the shield was an ID card that read, "Justice Beatrice Washington, State Supreme Court." "I am Justice Washington," she announced, her voice ringing off the cheap walls. "And for the last 6 months, my office has been conducting a sting operation on the corruption and bias within the Ridley County court system. We had reports, Judge Pendleton, reports that you treat your courtroom like a personal kingdom. Reports that you target the poor and the marginalized." She gestured to her clothes. "I dressed this way to see if the reports were true, to see if a woman of color, appearing poor and defenseless, would receive the same justice as the men in suits you so admire." She paused, letting the weight of the room settle on Pendleton's shoulders. "You failed, Arthur. You failed spectacularly." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Pendleton sank back into his chair, his face draining of all color. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by the terrified realization of a man watching his life crumble in real time. This is entrapment, Pendleton stammered, his voice weak. You can't do this. I didn't know who you were. That is exactly the point, Beatrice said, stepping out from behind the defendant's table. She walked toward the bench, entering the well of the court, a space usually reserved only for attorneys. Justice shouldn't depend on who you think someone is. It shouldn't matter if I am a Supreme Court justice or a housekeeper. The law is the law. She turned to the gallery. The people who had laughed earlier were now looking at their shoes, terrified. Is the recorder still running? Beatrice asked the stenographer. The woman nodded frantically. Yes, Your Honor. I mean, justice. Good, Beatrice said. Mark the time. 9:45 a.m. I am assuming emergency jurisdiction over Courtroom 4B pursuant to Article 6 of the state constitution regarding judicial misconduct. She looked back at Pendleton. Get out of that chair. Judge Pendleton didn't move. He gripped the armrests of his leather chair so tightly, his knuckles turned the color of bone. He looked like a captain refusing to leave a sinking ship, except the water rising around him was entirely of his own making. I said, Beatrice repeated, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. Get out of that chair. You have no authority, Pendleton choked out, though his voice wavered. This is my courtroom. You can't just walk in here with a badge and— I didn't just walk in here with a badge, Beatrice interrupted. She raised her right hand and snapped her fingers. The double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a resounding crash that made the gallery jump. 4 uniformed state marshals marched in. They weren't the doughy, bored municipal bailiffs like Officer Miller. These men were built like linebackers, wearing tactical vests and carrying the solemn weight of state authority. Leading them was Captain Robert Halloway, a man known in the state capital for his absolute lack of humor. He marched straight down the aisle, the sound of his heavy boots echoing like a drumbeat of doom. Officer Miller, who was still holding his taser near his hip, looked at the marshals, then at Beatrice, and slowly holstered his weapon. He took a step back, trying to blend into the wall paneling. Captain Halloway, Beatrice said, not looking away from Pendleton. Please remove the defendant from the bench. Defendant? Pendleton squeaked. You are no longer the judge, Arthur, Beatrice said coldly. As of this moment, you are a suspect in a criminal conspiracy. Captain Halloway ascended the steps to the bench. He didn't ask nicely. He reached out a gloved hand and grabbed Pendleton by the elbow. Up! Halloway barked. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? Pendleton shouted, flailing as he was hauled to his feet. His robes caught on the chair, ripping audibly, a sound like a balloon deflating. We know exactly who you are, Halloway said. He spun Pendleton around and shoved him down the stairs. The man who had spent 10 years looking down on people from a high perch stumbled and nearly fell onto the dirty linoleum floor of the well. He landed on his hands and knees right at Beatrice's feet. The symbolism was lost on no one. The gallery, usually silent out of fear, began to murmur. A few people pulled out phones, recording the impossible sight of the tyrant of Courtroom 4B, kneeling before the quiet woman in the grey cardigan. Beatrice looked down at him. Stand up, Arthur. We don't bow in this country. We answer for our crimes. She walked past him, ascending the stairs he had just been dragged down. She moved with a natural grace, ignoring the cheap plywood construction of the bench. She stood behind the high desk, placing her hands on the polished wood. She looked out over the courtroom. From up here, she could see everything. She could see the fear in the prosecutor's eyes, the sweat on the bailiff's brow, and the hope sparking in the eyes of the people in the back rows. She sat down. The chair squeaked, but she didn't seem to mind. She picked up the golden gavel she had brought, the heavy mahogany Supreme Court gavel, and struck the sounding block once. Bang! The sound was deep, resonant, and final. It sounded like justice. "Court is back in session," Beatrice announced. "The Honorable Justice Washington presiding. We are now hearing the matter of the people of the state versus Arthur Pendleton, David Sterling, and Gregory Miller." David Sterling, the sharp-dressed prosecutor, knocked over his water pitcher. "Me?" he stammered, standing up so fast his chair fell backward. "Justice Washington, surely there is a mistake. I am merely the prosecutor. I just argue the cases the police bring me. I have nothing to do with Judge Pendleton's behavior." Beatrice adjusted the microphone. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling, and don't insult my intelligence. A judge cannot run a scam this efficient without a prosecutor to grease the wheels." She opened the leather folder again. "We aren't just here about my parking tickets, gentlemen. We are here about the ghost docket." The color drained from Sterling's face so completely he looked like a wax figure. "Ah," Beatrice said, a sharp smile touching her lips. "I see you know the term. For the benefit of the public, let me explain. My investigation uncovered that, over the last 5 years, this court has issued over 4,000 warrants for failure to appear on citations that were never actually mailed to the defendants." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the second row burst into tears. "That's what happened to my husband," she sobbed. "He never got the ticket." Beatrice nodded to the woman, her expression softening for a brief moment. "I know, my dear. I know." She turned her gaze back to the 3 men, Pendleton standing in shock, Sterling trembling at his table, and Miller cowering by the door. "You issue fake tickets," Beatrice continued, her voice hardening into steel. "You ensure the victims never receive notice. When they inevitably miss the court date they didn't know they had, you issue a bench warrant. You arrest them. And then," she looked at Pendleton, "then you offer them a choice: jail time or pay an exorbitant administrative fee to a private probation company, a company called Ridley Justice Solutions." Beatrice pulled a sheet of paper from her file and held it up. A company registered in the name of, wait for it, Sarah Pendleton, your wife. The courtroom exploded. This wasn't just rudeness. This was theft. This was slavery by another name. "Silence!" Beatrice commanded, banging the gavel again. "That's a lie!" Pendleton screamed, his face purple. "That company provides a service. My wife is an independent business owner." "We audited the accounts, Arthur," Beatrice said calmly. $3 million in 5 years. Transferred from the poorest residents of this county directly into your offshore accounts in the Caymans. You've been buying yachts with the grocery money of single mothers." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "You laughed at my cardigan, Arthur. You mocked my poverty. But the only reason I look poor is because I don't steal from the people I swore to protect." The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The alliance between the corrupt officials shattered under the weight of the truth. When a ship sinks, the rats don't just swim, they climb over each other to breathe. David Sterling, the young prosecutor with the expensive suit and the bright future, was the first to break. He saw the marshals. He saw the Supreme Court justice. He calculated his odds and realized his loyalty to Pendleton was now a suicide pact. "I can testify," Sterling shouted, raising his hands. "I want to cut a deal. It was him. It was all Pendleton." Pendleton whipped his head around, eyes bulging. "You traitorous little weasel. You signed off on every single docket. You took a 30% cut. Because you forced me to." Sterling lied, his voice shrill. "I'm a junior prosecutor. He threatened my career. He said if I didn't process the ghost docket, he'd have me disbarred." "Liar!" Pendleton lunged at Sterling. Captain Halloway stepped in, shoving Pendleton back against the railing. "Stand down." "Let them speak," Beatrice said coolly. "I enjoy watching cannibals trying to eat one another." "It's true, Justice Washington," Sterling babbled, sweat pouring down his face. "I have the emails. I have the spreadsheets. He targeted specific zip codes, minority neighborhoods. He called them revenue zones. He told Miller which cars to tag with fake citations." Beatrice shifted her gaze to Officer Miller, the bailiff who had been laughing 10 minutes ago. He was now trying to edge toward the exit. "Officer Miller," Beatrice said, "don't take another step." Miller froze. "The investigation shows that you are the one who physically writes the tickets," Beatrice said. "But more interestingly, you are the one who serves the summons, or rather, claims to serve them. We found 3 boxes of undelivered court summons in the trunk of your patrol car this morning." Miller's knees gave out. He slumped against the wall. "I was just following orders," he whispered. "I have a pension." "You had a pension," Beatrice corrected. "Now you have a felony indictment." She looked back at Pendleton. The disgraced judge was panting, his hair disheveled, his robes torn. He looked small. He looked pathetic. But his eyes were still full of hate. "You can't prove I knew about the undelivered summons," Pendleton spat. "Sterling is a liar. Miller is incompetent. I am a judge. I rule based on the paperwork in front of me. If the paperwork is forged, that's not my crime. You have nothing on me directly, Beatrice." He used her first name like a slur. Beatrice smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "I was hoping you would say that, because I knew you would try to throw your underlings under the bus. You're a coward, Arthur, and cowards never leave a paper trail if they can help it." She reached into her bag one last time. "However," she said, "you made a mistake. You got arrogant. You didn't just target random strangers. Last year, you targeted a young man named Leo Carter." At the mention of the name, Pendleton flinched. A flicker of genuine recognition and fear crossed his face. "Leo Carter," Beatrice continued, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "A 22-year-old mechanics student. He was pulled over by Officer Miller for a broken tail light that was perfectly functional. He was issued 3 citations. He never received the court date. You issued a warrant. He was arrested at his job." Beatrice stood up slowly. "When he was brought before you, he tried to explain. He begged. He told you he would lose his apprenticeship if he went to jail. He told you he was the sole provider for his sick mother. Do you remember what you said to him, Arthur?" The courtroom was deadly silent. "You laughed," Beatrice said. "You told him, poverty is not an excuse for irresponsibility. You sentenced him to 6 months in county jail because he couldn't pay your extortion fee." "So what?" Pendleton sneered, trying to regain his footing. "He was a criminal. He served his time. He died in your jail," Beatrice said softly. The words hung in the air like smoke. "He had an asthma attack in his cell," Beatrice said, her eyes watering but her voice steady. "The guards trained by you, in a system run by you, ignored his cries for help. They thought he was faking. He died on the concrete floor of the Ridley County Jail over a parking ticket he didn't deserve." "People die," Pendleton shrugged, though his hands were shaking. "It's tragic, but it's not murder. And it's certainly not my fault." "Leo Carter," Beatrice said, "was my nephew." The twist hit the room like a physical blow. Pendleton's jaw dropped. Sterling covered his mouth with his hand. "He was my sister's son," Beatrice said, her voice rising, filling the room with the thunder of a grieving matriarch. "I didn't investigate you because of politics, Arthur. I didn't come here because of statistics. I came here because you killed my boy. I came here to look into the eyes of the man who thought his life was worth less than a $200 fine." She pointed the gavel at him like a weapon. "You wanted to know why I'm here in a cardigan? Because this was Leo's favorite sweater. I wore it so he could be here to watch you fall." Pendleton backed away, shaking his head. I didn't know. How could I know he was related to a Supreme Court justice?" "That is exactly the problem," Beatrice roared, slamming her hand on the desk. "It shouldn't matter. If he was a nobody, his life still mattered. Justice isn't about who your aunt is. It's about right and wrong. And you, Arthur Pendleton, are everything that is wrong." She turned to the marshals. "Captain Halloway." "Yes, Justice. Take them all," she ordered. "Judge Pendleton, Prosecutor Sterling, and Officer Miller are under arrest for racketeering, fraud, official misconduct, and manslaughter." "Manslaughter?" Pendleton shrieked as Halloway grabbed his wrists and slapped the cuffs on. "You can't charge me with manslaughter." "I can," Beatrice said calmly, sitting back down. "And I just did. The grand jury indicted you this morning, 5 minutes after I walked into this building. You're not going to county lockup, Arthur. You're going to federal prison. And I promise you, the robes they give you, there won't be nearly as nice as the one you just ripped." As the marshals dragged the 3 struggling men out of the courtroom, the gallery erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a release of years of tension. People cheered, they hugged. The woman in the second row, the one whose husband had been targeted, stood up and clapped until her hands hurt. Beatrice didn't smile. She watched them go. She watched the doors swing shut on the men who had terrorized this community. She looked down at the empty defendant's table where she had sat just 20 minutes ago. She touched the wool of her grey cardigan. "We got him, Leo," she whispered. "We got him." But the story wasn't over. Removing the head of the snake was one thing, but Beatrice knew that corruption was like mold. It grew deep in the walls. And Arthur Pendleton wasn't working alone. He had friends in high places, friends who were watching this live stream and who were already making phone calls to ensure Justice Beatrice Washington didn't survive the week. The phone on the judge's bench rang. Beatrice stared at it. It was the private, internal line. Only someone with high-level clearance could call this number. She picked it up. "This is Justice Washington." A smooth, deep voice on the other end spoke. "You've made a terrible mistake, Beatrice. You should have just paid the parking ticket." Beatrice held the receiver to her ear, her expression unreadable. The courtroom was bustling with marshals securing evidence, but the world seemed to narrow down to the voice on the other end of the line. "Who is this?" Beatrice asked, her tone icy. "A concerned citizen," the voice replied. It was smooth, cultivated, the kind of voice that ordered expensive scotch and decided the fate of neighborhoods from behind closed doors. "One who thinks you've overstepped, Justice Washington. You've had your fun. You embarrassed Arthur. But if you pursue the money, you won't just lose your robe. You'll lose your life." "Is that a threat, Senator Blackwood?" Beatrice asked. There was a pause on the line, a sharp intake of breath. "I didn't identify myself." "You didn't have to," Beatrice replied, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on a framed portrait hanging crookedly behind the judge's bench. It was a photo of Judge Pendleton shaking hands with State Senator Harrison Blackwood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. "I know the sound of a man who thinks he owns the law. You appointed Pendleton. You blocked the inquiry into the jail 2 years ago, and unless I'm mistaken, your re-election campaign is heavily funded by a PAC that shares an address with Ridley Justice Solutions. You're playing a dangerous game, Beatrice. Blackwood's voice lost its smoothness, replaced by a jagged edge of anger. This is Ridley County. Things happen here. Cars crash. Houses catch fire. Old women have accidents. Leave the records alone. Walk away. Go back to the capital and retire. I am retired, Beatrice lied effortlessly. That's why I have so much free time to hunt monsters. You have 1 hour to vacate the building and release my associates, Blackwood hissed, or you'll see exactly how deep the swamp goes. The line went dead. Beatrice slowly hung up the phone. She looked at Captain Holloway, who was standing by the bench, watching her closely. Trouble, Justice? Holloway asked, his hand resting on his sidearm. The head of the snake just hissed, Beatrice said. Senator Blackwood. He's panicked. Blackwood? Holloway grimaced. He's untouchable. He controls the state police budget. He has friends in the FBI. If he's involved, we need to move these prisoners to a federal facility immediately. This building isn't safe. Agreed, Beatrice said. She stood up, smoothing down her grey cardigan. Get Pendleton and Sterling into the armoured transport. I want them in the capital by sunset. And Captain, I need the physical hard drives from Pendleton's computer. Do not trust the cloud backups. Blackwood's IT guys will wipe them remotely within minutes. On it, Holloway said, shouting orders to his team. Beatrice walked down from the bench. She picked up her old leather bag. She felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. She had struck a blow, yes, but Blackwood was right about one thing. She was in hostile territory. As she pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courthouse to leave, she expected fresh air. Instead, she was blinded by flashbulbs. A swarm of reporters was waiting at the bottom of the concrete steps. News vans blocked the street. Microphones were thrust in her face before her foot even hit the pavement. Justice Washington, is it true you suffered a mental breakdown? Sources say you held a judge hostage at gunpoint. Senator Blackwood's office just released a statement claiming you are abusing your power for a personal vendetta. Do you have a comment? Beatrice stopped. She looked at the sea of cameras. It was a coordinated ambush. Blackwood moved fast. He was trying to control the narrative, to paint her as an unstable, grieving aunt who had gone rogue, rather than a justice uncovering corruption. She raised a hand. The crowd quieted, expecting a defense. Senator Blackwood, Beatrice said, her voice projecting clearly into the microphones without shouting, says I am abusing my power. He calls this a vendetta. She looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. He is right. It is a vendetta. It is a vendetta on behalf of every mother who has lost a child to a system designed to crush them. It is a vendetta against greed. And as for my mental state, I have never been more focused in my life. She pushed past the reporters, flanked by 2 marshals. They hurried her toward a waiting black SUV. Get in, Justice, the driver yelled, the engine revving. Beatrice climbed into the back seat. Holloway jumped in the front passenger side. The doors locked with a heavy thud. Go, Holloway ordered. The SUV peeled away from the curb, sirens blaring. But they hadn't gone 3 blocks before a heavy sanitation truck pulled out from an alleyway, blocking the road completely. It's a trap, Holloway shouted. Reverse! The driver slammed the gear stick into reverse, but a dark sedan screeched up behind them, boxing them in. Beatrice looked out the window. 4 men in ski masks exited the sedan. They weren't holding cameras. They were holding baseball bats and tire irons. They weren't here to kill a Supreme Court justice. That would bring too much heat. They were here to send a message, to break bones, to scare her into silence. "Hold tight," Holloway said, unholstering his weapon. "Stay down, Justice." "I am tired of staying down, Captain," Beatrice said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a cell phone, not her personal one, but a burner. She dialed a number. Outside, the men were smashing the headlights of the SUV. The glass shattered. One man swung a bat at Beatrice's window. The reinforced glass spiderwebbed but held. "Open the door, Grandma!" the man screamed, raising the bat for another strike. Inside the car, Beatrice spoke into the phone. "Now." Suddenly, the wail of sirens filled the air. But not police sirens. These were deeper, louder. From the adjacent streets, 4 massive black tactical vans swarmed the intersection. The side doors slid open, and a dozen agents wearing jackets emblazoned with FBI, Public Corruption Unit, poured out, rifles raised. "Federal agents, drop the weapons." The thugs froze. They looked at the FBI agents, then at their bats, realizing they had brought sticks to a gunfight. They dropped the weapons and raised their hands. Beatrice watched through the cracked glass as the men were shoved against the sedan and handcuffed. She looked at Holloway, who was staring at her in shock. "You called the FBI?" "I called them 3 days ago," Beatrice admitted, a small smile playing on her lips. "I knew Blackwood would try something stupid. I needed him to commit an overt act of violence to justify a federal RICO warrant. Attempting to assault a Supreme Court justice? That carries a 20-year mandatory minimum." She leaned back in the seat as the FBI agents cleared the sanitation truck. "Senator Blackwood thinks this is checkers," Beatrice whispered. "He doesn't realize I've been playing chess since before he was born." That evening, the Grand Hotel in the state capital was glowing with golden light. It was the night of the Liberty Gala, a fundraiser hosted by Senator Harrison Blackwood. The tickets cost $5,000 a plate. The room was filled with the state's elite, lobbyists, developers, corrupt mayors, and judges who knew how to play the game. Senator Blackwood stood at the podium, looking every bit the statesman. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than Leo Carter would have made in 5 years. He held a glass of champagne, beaming at the crowd. "My friends," Blackwood boomed, his voice smooth as silk. "We live in challenging times. We see chaos in our courts. We see rogue actors trying to tear down our institutions. But I promise you, as long as I am your senator, law and order will prevail." Applause thundered through the ballroom. Blackwood smiled, taking a sip of his drink. He felt good. His men had failed to beat up Beatrice Washington, yes, but the message had been sent. She was in protective custody now, likely terrified. He would bury her in paperwork and legal injunctions by morning. She was old. She would break. The double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Usually, late arrivals tried to sneak in. But the figure standing in the doorway didn't sneak. It was Beatrice Washington. But she wasn't wearing the grey cardigan. She wasn't wearing the sensible shoes. She was wearing a floor-length gown of deep, midnight blue velvet. Around her neck hung a string of pearls that were real and heavy. Her hair was no longer in a severe bun, but styled elegantly. She looked regal. She looked powerful. She looked like the Queen entering her court. And flanking her were not marshals, but the State Attorney General and the Director of the FBI. The applause died down. The music stopped. A hush fell over the room so profound you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Beatrice began to walk. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She didn't look left or right. Her eyes were locked on Harrison Blackwood. Blackwood gripped the podium. He turned off his microphone, but in the silence, his hiss was audible. "What is she doing here? Security." "Security has been relieved, Senator," the FBI director said, stepping up beside Beatrice as they reached the stage. "By my agents." Beatrice stopped at the foot of the stage. She looked up at Blackwood. "Good evening, Harrison," she said. Her voice was calm, conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. "I hope I didn't miss the toast." "You have no business here," Blackwood snarled, losing his composure. "This is a private event. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." "Trespassing?" Beatrice laughed softly. She turned to the crowd. "The senator is worried about trespassing. Isn't that ironic, considering he has been trespassing on the lives of his constituents for a decade?" She walked up the stairs to the stage. Blackwood backed away, instinctively knowing that being near her was dangerous. Beatrice took the microphone from the podium. She turned to the room of wealthy donors. "You all paid $5,000 to be here," she said. "You think you're supporting liberty. But let me tell you where your money actually goes." She signaled to the back of the room. A technician, commanded by the FBI, projected an image onto the massive screen behind the stage. It was a bank transfer record. "This," Beatrice said, pointing to the screen, "is a transfer from Ridley Justice Solutions, the company that extorted the poor of Ridley County, the company that killed my nephew, Leo Carter." The image changed. "And this," she continued, "is the receiving account. Blackwood Horizon Super PAC, $4 million, directly from the pockets of innocent people into the campaign chest of this man." Gasps filled the room. Donors began to whisper frantically. This wasn't just a scandal, it was radioactive. Blackwood lunged for the microphone. "Turn it off, it's fake. She forged it." Beatrice sidestepped him easily. "I don't forge things, Harrison. I find them. And I found something else." The screen changed again. This time it wasn't a bank record. It was an email. A printed email blown up to 10 feet tall. From hblackwoodesonate.gov to Judge Pendleton Court.Ridley. Subject, the problem. Arthur, make the problem go away. If the boy dies, he dies. Just make sure the asthma inhaler goes missing from the evidence locker. We can't have him testifying about the fake ticket. The room went dead silent. This wasn't embezzlement. This was conspiracy to commit murder. Blackwood froze. He stared at the screen, his face draining of blood until he looked like a ghost. Where did you get that?" "Judge Pendleton is very talkative when he's facing a life sentence," Beatrice said coldly. "He gave us everything, Harrison. The passwords, the servers, the emails. He flipped on you before the transport even reached the city limits." Beatrice turned to look at Blackwood. The gap between them was only a few feet, but morally it was an ocean. "You called me on the phone today," Beatrice said, her voice amplified through the speakers, booming like thunder. "You told me to remember that I was in Ridley County. You told me old women have accidents." She stepped closer. "Well, I have news for you, Senator. I am not just an old woman. I am the consequences of your actions." She nodded to the FBI director. "Senator Harrison Blackwood," the director announced, stepping forward with handcuffs drawn. "You are under arrest for murder in the first degree, racketeering, and federal conspiracy." "No!" Blackwood shouted, backing up until he hit the heavy velvet curtains. "You can't do this. I am a senator. I am—" "You are nothing," Beatrice interrupted. The agents moved in. They grabbed Blackwood, spinning him around. The tuxedo that cost $5,000 bunched up as they cuffed his hands behind his back. The clicks of the handcuffs were the loudest sound in the room. As they marched him across the stage, Blackwood looked at the crowd, desperate for help. "Do something. This is a coup. Help me." But the room of elites, the people he thought were his friends, turned their backs. They looked at their phones, at the floor, anywhere but at the sinking ship. Beatrice stood center stage, watching him be dragged away. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces. "The gala is over," she said simply. "Go home." She placed the microphone down. As she walked off the stage, the Attorney General fell into step beside her. "That was impressive, Justice. But you know this isn't the end. The trial will be a circus. His lawyers will drag your nephew's name through the mud." Beatrice stopped. She touched the pearl necklace, thinking of the cheap plastic rosary Leo used to keep in his pocket. "Let them try," she said. "I've taken down the judge. I've taken down the senator. If the lawyers want to fight, they better bring more than just words. Because I'm just getting started." She walked toward the exit, her head held high. But as she reached the door, she saw a young woman standing there. It was Sarah, the terrified clerk from Courtroom 4B. She had driven all the way to the Capitol. Sarah was holding a thick envelope. Her hands were shaking. "Justice Washington?" Sarah whispered. Beatrice softened her expression. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I saw the news," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. I worked for them for 3 years. I knew something was wrong, but I was too scared to speak. I saved these." She held out the envelope. "What is this?" Beatrice asked, taking it. "It's the list," Sarah said. "The real list. Every single person they scammed. Every car they towed. Every life they ruined. There are thousands of them." Beatrice looked at the thick envelope. This was the key to restitution. This was the way to give the money back. "You did a brave thing, Sarah," Beatrice said. "I just wanted to help," Sarah sniffled. "Is it over?" Beatrice looked back at the empty stage where the senator had stood. "The war is over," Beatrice said. "But the cleanup is just beginning." 6 months later, the air in the federal district court was very different from the stale, hopeless atmosphere of Courtroom 4B. This room smelled of furniture polish and serious intent. The gallery was packed, not with terrified defendants, but with the families of the victims who had been preyed upon by the Ridley Justice Solutions scheme. Beatrice Washington sat in the front row. She wasn't wearing her judicial robes today. She wore a simple black suit, her hands resting quietly in her lap. Beside her sat Sarah, the former clerk, who had become the star witness for the prosecution. On the defense side, Arthur Pendleton and Harrison Blackwood looked like ghosts of their former selves. Pendleton had lost 20 pounds. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. Blackwood, stripped of his Senate pin and his power, looked aged and frail. They refused to look at the gallery. They refused to look at Beatrice. The trial had been a spectacle. Blackwood's high-priced lawyers had tried everything. They claimed the evidence was inadmissible. They claimed Beatrice had a conflict of interest. They even tried to paint Leo Carter as a dangerous criminal to justify his treatment. But Beatrice had been ready. Every time they threw up a roadblock, she had a maneuver prepared. The files Sarah provided, the true list, had been the final nail in the coffin. It detailed over 5,000 illegal citations, totaling $12 million in theft. It linked specific payments to Blackwood's offshore accounts. It was a map of greed so detailed that no jury could ignore it. "Will the defendants please rise?" the federal judge commanded. Pendleton and Blackwood stood up. Their legs were shaky. "On the charge of racketeering, the jury finds the defendants guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, the jury finds the defendants guilty. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, resulting in death regarding the victim Leo Carter, the jury finds the defendants guilty." A sob broke out in the courtroom. It came from Beatrice. She pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. It wasn't a sob of sadness, but of an immense, crushing weight finally being lifted. The judge looked down at the men. "Arthur Pendleton, you disgraced the bench. You turned a sanctuary of law into a marketplace of extortion. I sentence you to 30 years in federal prison." Pendleton's knees gave out. His attorneys had to hold him up. "Harrison Blackwood," the judge continued, his voice hardening, "you were trusted by the people to write the laws, not break them. You used your office to protect a murderer. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel came down. Bang! It was over. As the marshals led the men away, this time in handcuffs that would not be coming off, Beatrice stood up. She turned to the people behind her, the community of Ridley County. "We got it back," she announced, her voice trembling with emotion. "The court has ordered full asset forfeiture. Blackwood's estates, Pendleton's accounts, it's all being liquidated. Every penny taken from you will be returned." The courtroom erupted in cheers, but Beatrice slipped away quietly. She had one last appointment. An hour later, the sun was setting over the Pleasant Hill Cemetery. It was a quiet place, far removed from the noise of the city. Beatrice walked across the grass until she reached a modest headstone near an old oak tree. Leo Carter, beloved son and nephew, 1999, 2024. Beatrice knelt in the grass. She didn't mind the dirt staining her suit. She placed a hand on the cold stone. "I did it, Leo," she whispered. "I told you I wouldn't let them get away with it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the official verdict form, stamped with the federal seal. She tucked it under a small stone on top of the grave marker, alongside the plastic rosary he had loved. "They took your breath away, baby," Beatrice said, tears finally streaming freely down her face. "But they will never take another breath as free men. You changed the world, Leo. You didn't know it, but you cleaned up the whole county." A gentle wind blew through the oak tree, rustling the leaves. It felt like a sigh, a release. Beatrice stayed there until the sun went down, sitting in the quiet company of the boy she had loved. She was a Supreme Court justice, a woman of immense power, but in that moment, she was just an aunt who missed her nephew. As she finally stood up to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a text from the governor. "Justice Washington, with the Senate seat now vacant, we need someone with integrity to fill the term. The people are asking for you." Beatrice looked at the text, then back at Leo's grave. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "What do you think, Leo?" she asked the wind. "One more fight?" She put the phone in her pocket and walked out of the cemetery, ready for whatever came next. The gavel had fallen, but justice never slept. What a journey, from a ridiculed woman in a moth-eaten cardigan to the force of nature that brought down an entire corrupt empire. This story reminds us that true power doesn't come from a title, a suit, or a judge's bench. It comes from integrity and the courage to stand up for what is right. Judge Pendleton and Senator Blackwood thought they were untouchable because of their status, but they forgot the most important rule of all. Karma has no deadline, and justice is always watching. Beatrice Washington showed us that even when the system is broken, one determined person can fix it. If you enjoyed this story of intense drama, shocking twists, and ultimate karmic justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Beatrice's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.